From RIX XE Studio. This is an instructional video of RIX XE, an easy time-lapse slider, on setting its controller app RIX LAPSE. By the time of recording, it is RIX LAPSE version 2.0. This video explains how to do setting, how to prepare the camera and the slider, and how to run a time-lapse session. RIX LAPSE eliminates pitfalls and hazards in setting a motion control slider, as well as shorten user learning curve, making time-lapse photography an easy thing to do. This video covers only setting in the time-lapse mode. For other modes like live videography, stop motion, and virtual joystick will be presented in different videos. In lapse mode, what the slider does exactly once the session starts is, it triggers the camera, then moves the camera a little, and waits for some time. Then triggers the camera, moves the camera a little, and waits for some time, and on and on. To control the slider to do that, set the parameters on the interface of RIX LAPSE app. RIX LAPSE avoids netted menu. The interface is explicit, simple, and easy to read. Yellow numbers are parameters to be set. Blue ones are status. Setting can be done by direct input of parameter values or by loading a preset profile. Distance is the cruise distance of a camera over the slider. It is how far the camera is expected to cruise along the slider. 930 mm is the maximum cruise distance of RIX XE 2. From is the starting point of cruising. It can be either end of the slider, left end or right end, going to the opposite direction. Or it can start from the current position of the camera, going to the left or to the right. From current, go right for 100 shots. The session is now started. It takes a few seconds for the controller to send parameters to the slider. The camera is shooting and moving from current position to the right as set. Now stop this. And try something different. From one end going to the right. The length of a session can be determined either in form of duration of time or number of shots. Duration indicates how long this session will last. For example, 4 hours, 12 minutes, and 30 seconds. Once entered, the time is transformed to seconds. Or select shots. Shots indicates the total number of shots to shoot in a session. Enter 30. Only either one of duration or shot is allowed to be set. leaving the other to vary. An interval is the time between shots. It is the cycle time of triggering the camera, moving the camera, and waiting for some time. Once the interval is specified, and shot is entered, duration will be automatically calculated. But if duration is entered, shots will be calculated instead. Technically, duration, shots, and interval are correlative. When the values of any two are specified, the value of the third one is fixed. An interval determines the looks and feels of the time-lapse video, how fast clouds move, how fast light changes, how fast shadows move. So interval is considered a prime parameter which is allowed to be set always, leaving only either one of duration or shots to be chosen. When a session starts, cycles of shooting, moving, and waiting are performed for the number of times set as shots. For example, if shots is set to 30, RIX LAPSE performs 30 cycles of shooting, moving, and waiting. And after finishing the last cycle, it shoots an extra image before ending the session. So the session runs 30 intervals with a total number of 31 images. The line that follows the interval is a kind of utility to calculate the output video length. In other words, it gives an idea how long the output video will be. Just enter a frame rate, say 24 frames per second. The length of the time-lapse video output is calculated and displayed. But this length is just for information. It has nothing to do with how a time-lapse session is run. To get a video of a certain length, adjust either duration, shots, or interval until the calculation shows the desired output length. Mentioned earlier that during an interval, the slider triggers the camera, moves the camera a little, and waits for some time. To be more precise, there are 4 activities in each interval, not 3: shooting, moving, waiting, and file saving. Each of these activities consumes time. Shooting time or exposure time is equal to the shutter speed. Moving time is the time used in moving the camera from one position to the next. Waiting time is the allowing time for the camera to stop shaking caused by the preceding movement. The camera is supposed to be still before it shoots the next shot. Saving time is the time allowing the camera to save an image file to the card. Now, go to the next parameter, speed. Speed is camera shutter speed. There are 2 options to set a speed: setting the shutter speed at the camera itself, or letting RIX LAPSE control the shutter speed. Setting a shutter speed at the camera overrides that set on RIX LAPSE. To let RIX LAPSE handle the shutter speed, the camera must be set to bulk. There are 2 optional formats to enter speed parameter in RIX LAPSE: fractions on the left and decimal on the right. To switch between these 2 formats, just toggle the arrows. Sliding to select a fraction. Direct input for decimal. Try setting the shutter speed to 1/4 of a second. Toggling the arrows transform the fraction into a decimal, but a decimal input is not transformed into a fraction. Although 3 decimal places are allowed for input, RIX LAPSE calculates a shutter speed down to the 6 decimal places. What a proper shutter speed is can be determined by test shooting the camera in aperture priority mode and use that result for speed parameter here. Before starting the session, do not forget to switch the camera back to manual with bulb mode. Moving time, one of the 4 factors mentioned previously, will be self-calculated by the slider. No need for the user to enter the parameter. After each move, the camera is allowed to stop shaking. 1 or 2 seconds would be fine. If the interval is long enough, wait check can be disregarded. There is another time factor, file saving time. The length of file saving depends on the image size, camera buffer, and the card writing speed. However, saving time is not included here in the equation because file saving action is performed in parallel to camera moving action and check waiting. Shooting, moving, and check waiting have to be contained in an interval. As a result, an interval has its minimum limit, which cannot be any shorter, else it cannot contain those 3 factors. Generally speaking, an interval should not be shorter than 3 seconds, on the condition that the slider is placed with a level position. In an upright position, the minimum setting for an interval must be longer than 3 seconds, depending on the camera weight. Instead of controlling this limit, RIX LAPSE leaves it to the user to test and get the maximum extent for each particular slider setup. If accuracy is the agenda, do not squeeze the interval down against this limit. But what if 3 factors are set larger than the interval? What happens exactly is the interval is push extended. The shot is not skipped, but the interval is adjusted to let all those 3 factors fit exactly within it. Exactly means the slider shoots the next shot right after all 3 activities are finished. The total number of shots is maintained. The total duration is inevitably extended. This characteristic is also applied in BRAMPing. BRAMPing will be mentioned later in this video. Bracketing will be mentioned later too. At the camera, set everything to manual, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Deactivate all automatically features to prevent all kinds of flickering. Set white balance to daylight or at a fixed Kelvin. As well, set the camera to manual focus too. Turn off auto ISO. Turn off the active lighting, lighting optimizer, HDR, highlight shadow recovery, or anything of that kind. Make sure that the wire is connected to the camera properly. Now, tap the Start button. On start, the slider prepares itself by moving the camera to the starting end first. In this case, the left end. Then it starts the session by going to the right as set. RIX XE checks and verifies the camera position by itself. It does not require the user to calibrate the slider before starting a session. The session can be paused anytime and can be resumed by tapping play button. At the session end, there are beeps and lights on the slider, and the remote control display an alert, session completed. Everything stops. All these settings can be saved as a profile for future use. Tap Save button and enter a name. To recall a profile, tap the Load button and pick any profile. To delete the profile, tap Load, touch and hold on the targeted profile, then select Delete. Lapse mode has its own profile library. Other modes have theirs. Each of them is managed independently. Now, a new session can be started without closing and restarting the app. To entirely finish time-lapse photography, make sure the session is completed, else force end it by tapping Stop button. Then close RIX Lapse by tapping Smartphone Back button 2 times. And turn off the slider. Now back to the topics we skipped previously. LENR, or Long Exposure Noise Reduction. This feature is available on most DSLR cameras. If this feature is active, the image processing on the camera takes extra time. Generally, LENR processing consumes the same amount of time as the shutter speed. Let RIX Lapse know if this function on the camera is set to active, so the app includes this factor into the equation. Next, damping in time-lapse. By the time of recording, time-lapse damping is still under development. The next one is a large topic, BRAMPing. There are chances that a time-lapse session lasts from day to night, such as that during sunset. During this period, the natural light changes gradually. Setting the camera to a fixed shutter speed ends up with dark frames around the end of the session. Setting the camera to auto shutter speed can handle this. On a day-to-night time-lapse, the camera automatically increases the exposure time to compensate the decreasing sunlight. The output video will have balanced exposure over the time. Unfortunately, this method produces flickering of exposure values. Flickering occurs mainly when the shutter speeds are ramped in steps, say 1/3 of an EV step at a time. Flickering can be easily noticed when a sequence of images is stitched together into a time-lapse video. To avoid flickering, the shutter speed must be ramped gradually and ramped shot by shot, not shifted in steps for packs of shots. The technique to ramp shutter speed gradually is called bulk ramping, or BRAMPing in short. One way to do this is to hand over the shutter speed ramping to an external device or software designed particularly for ramping control. The camera has to be set to bulb to let RIX LAPSE control the speed. RIX LAPSE controls smooth ramping for a day to night or night to day sequence. It shifts the shutter speed by microseconds. RIX LAPSE 1.0 lets the user manually control ramping with millisecond shutter speed shift. RIX LAPSE 2.0 provides automatic ramping which corresponds to natural light pattern and with microsecond shutter speed shift. How to set ramping will be mentioned in full details in another video titled BRAMP. Bracketing. Most DSLRs have bracketing feature which takes multiple images in one shot, varying in exposure values. For example, 3 images bracketing, 1 EV stop apart, one shot with balanced exposure, another with underexposure, and the other one with overexposure. They are later merged to get the best dynamic range using HDR software or luminosity mask technique. RIX XE performs bracketing for each shot of a time-lapse sequence. Set the camera to single frame, not bracketing, and let RIX LAPSE take control of bracketing. The camera has to be set to bulb mode to accept shutter speed bracketing control from RIX LAPSE. RIX LAPSE triggers up to 13 bracketing images with 6 EV stops apart. Setting bracketing will be demonstrated in another video titled Setting 2. And this is parameter setting on RIX LAPSE app for RIX XE slider. In practice, most time-lapse photographers experience conflicts on motion control setting, such as setting a shutter speed longer than the interval, setting a shutter speed too short that the camera cannot perform in bulb mode, setting a cruise distance longer than the slider length, and many others. RIX LAPSE checks for those conflicts and either alerts the user to rectify or provides a practical range for setting. Please proceed to Part 2 of Parameter Setting, which explains how RIX LAPSE prevents the user from setting conflicts. Setting 2 goes deeper in advanced features such as shift on the fly, session status, warnings and alerts, tricks and traps. As well, it summarizes situations under which the shutter speed has to be controlled by RIX LAPSE and situations which direct camera setting has more advantages. So please proceed to setting part 2. Thank you.